The African savanna stretched wide beneath the setting sun, bathed in soft golden light. It was the kind of evening that seemed to hold its breath, as if the entire world had paused to admire the beauty of the moment. Tall grasses swayed gently in the breeze, their golden blades shimmering like fields of fire. The scattered acacia trees stood like ancient guardians, casting long shadows across the warm earth. In the distance, the silhouette of a mountain range loomed hazy, softened by the sun's fading light. A dirt road wound like a ribbon through this vast, open landscape. Upon it came a lone vehicle, an old dust-covered Hummer H1. It rumbled quietly, its heavy tires crunching over small stones and dry soil. Behind the wheel sat a man in his late 40s. His face was tanned and lined by years spent outdoors, his eyes calm and observant. He wasn't in a rush. He never was, not out here. This land, this quiet place, was his refuge. He'd spent much of his life surrounded by noise, first as a soldier in distant lands, then as a man who had tried to return to a normal life, but found something missing. Out here, in the wild, he found silence that wasn't empty. It was full of meaning. It was a silence that spoke. The man leaned out of the window slightly, breathing in the dry air tinged with the earthy scent of sun-baked grass and distant flowers. He listened, not for anything in particular, but simply to hear the rhythm of the land, the soft rustle of wind, the occasional trill of a distant bird, the whisper of time. And then, something changed. A movement, barely there, flashed in the corner of his vision. The grasses along the roadside shivered unnaturally, not in response to the breeze, but to something living, something in pain. His instincts sharpened. He slowed the Hummer to a crawl, scanning the side of the road. Most people wouldn't have noticed it, but he wasn't most people. He had learned to see what others missed, to hear the unspoken, to feel the unseen. He pulled the vehicle to a full stop and stepped out. The air felt different now, thicker, as if something unseen was holding its breath. He walked slowly toward the movement, his boots crunching softly on dry twigs. A few meters off the road, hidden among the tall grasses, he saw a shape. At first it looked like a large mound of earth, unmoving. But as he came closer, his heart dropped. It was a lioness. Her powerful body lay twisted, breathing shallowly. Her legs were tangled in something cruel, old rusted barbed wire, likely left behind from a forgotten fence. It wrapped around her hind legs like a trap, digging deep into her flesh. Blood matted her fur, but what stopped the man in his tracks wasn't the sight of her injuries. It was her eyes. She looked at him, not with fear but with pain, exhaustion, surrender, as if she had given up on fighting but still hoped somehow for kindness. Then he noticed another presence. A few steps away, half shielded by tall grass, stood a male lion, massive, golden, majestic. His mane shimmered in the dying sunlight. He stood silently, his powerful body perfectly still, watching. The man froze. The lion's eyes met his, not wild, not furious, but alert, guarded, and aware. This was no ordinary moment. The male lion didn't growl, didn't threaten. He simply stood, his gaze locked on the man, as if measuring his soul. The man slowly raised his hands, not in defense, but in respect. His heart pounded, but he kept still. In that silent exchange, something passed between them, an understanding. The lioness needed help. She was more than wounded. She was pregnant. Her rounded belly moved slightly with life. Time was running out. The man knew this wasn't just about saving an animal. This was something sacred. He turned and walked slowly back to his Hummer, never taking his eyes off the lion. He opened the rear compartment, reached for a small medical kit, and took out a pair of wire cutters. Not much, but it would have to do. The sun dipped lower behind the trees, casting the world in deep amber. The man stood once more at the edge of the grass, ready to step into the space between fear and trust, between wild and human, between pain and hope. And the golden silence of the savanna watched. The man stood at the edge of the tall grass, the rusted wire cutters in one hand, and his breath caught somewhere between his chest and his throat. The lion was still there, a few meters away, silent as the wind, his eyes burning with quiet fire. The setting sun cast a deep orange glow over the savanna, and the air had turned still, heavy with something unspoken. With a slow, respectful step, the man moved forward. Every movement was deliberate. No sudden motions, no loud sounds. He knew that one wrong step could turn this fragile balance into chaos. But something inside him, perhaps the same instinct that had kept him alive in war zones, told him this was not a battlefield. This was something else. A test, maybe. A bridge between two worlds. As he approached the wounded lioness, she stirred weakly. Her golden fur, now streaked with blood and dust, glistened faintly in the light. She tried to lift her head, then let it fall back. Her breathing was shallow, labored. Her body trembled with exhaustion. He crouched low, keeping his eyes on hers, speaking in a soft whisper. Not words exactly, just sounds, gentle hums. A quiet voice meant to soothe, not to command. "I'm not here to hurt you," he murmured. "You're not alone anymore." He reached out, slowly, with his empty hand, palm open. She flinched slightly, then stilled. Her eyes fluttered closed, as if she had no more strength to resist, only a quiet hope that maybe, just maybe, this man meant no harm. He examined the wire. It had looped tight around her hind legs, cutting deep into her skin. The metal was old, brittle in some places, dangerously sharp in others. It would be delicate work. Too much movement could make the injuries worse, but waiting any longer would risk infection, or worse. He took the wire cutters and began. Each snip of metal echoed in the silence like a heartbeat. The lioness groaned softly, but didn't move. She trusted him, at least enough not to pull away. Blood welled where the wire had been, and he worked quickly, wrapping clean gauze from his kit around the worst of the wounds. And then he felt it. A presence. He looked up. The male lion had moved. Not much, just a step or two closer. But it was enough to send a jolt of adrenaline through the man's veins. The lion's gaze was no longer just guarded. It was searching, studying, and something in his eyes had shifted. There was sorrow there, worry, helplessness. This wasn't just an animal watching over a wounded mate. This was a partner, a protector, a father. The man nodded slowly, understanding. "I'm helping her," he whispered. "For you, for both of you." The wind stirred again, gentle and warm. It carried the scent of dry earth, crushed leaves, and the soft musk of lion fur. The sky above had deepened into a canvas of twilight blues and purples. Stars had begun to peek through, blinking down like watchful eyes. Finally, the last piece of wire snapped loose. The man tossed it aside, far from where it could harm again. He pressed fresh cloth to the bleeding wounds, tied it off with strips of cotton, and sat back on his heels, breathing heavily. The lioness lifted her head, just a little. Their eyes met again, and in that moment, something passed between them. Not words, not thoughts, just something whole. A quiet understanding, a thank you. The male lion made a low sound, half a growl, half a sigh, and stepped forward again. The man didn't move. The lion stopped just a few feet away, towering above them both. Then slowly, the great lion sat down. Side by side, the man and the lion watched the night settle in. Crickets began their songs. The stars multiplied. A soft wind blew across the land. They were no longer strangers, not fully, not anymore. The lioness, weak but no longer alone, lay her head on the earth and closed her eyes. She would need rest, time, safety, and now she had all three. Darkness had draped itself gently over the savanna. The last light of the sun faded into memory, and the stars emerged in full, scattered like diamonds across a velvet sky. The air was cooler now, touched by the faint scent of distant rain. Somewhere, far off, a night bird called. The world had shifted into a slower rhythm, one made for stillness and silence. The man remained where he had been, seated quietly in the tall grass, only a few feet from the lioness. His hands were stained with dried blood, the wire cutters resting on the ground beside him. His breath had slowed, matching the natural beat of the wilderness around him. He didn't speak. There was no need to. The lioness lay motionless, save for the slow rise and fall of her side. The bleeding had eased, though her breathing remained heavy. Her legs, now freed from the barbed wire, were wrapped in white cloth, makeshift bandages that bore the imprint of kindness. The man knew she wasn't out of danger, but he also knew she had a chance now, and sometimes a chance was enough. The male lion sat a few steps away, just beyond arm's reach. His body was massive, muscles hidden beneath a coat of gold and shadow. His amber eyes glowed faintly in the starlight. He didn't move. He simply watched, his gaze steady, unblinking, full of a presence that felt like more than just instinct. The man had never felt so close to something ancient. It was not fear that bound them there. It was something softer, something stronger, a mutual recognition, the kind that doesn't need language to be understood. They were guardians, both of them. The man turned his eyes to the sky. Above, the constellations wheeled quietly through the heavens. He could see Orion's belt, the Southern Cross, and somewhere in the mix, stars whose names he did not know, but whose presence comforted him nonetheless. He thought of all the nights he had spent alone in this wilderness, the times he had camped beneath this same sky, listening to the wind play its music through the trees. But never had a night felt like this. Never had he sat so close to the edge of the wild and felt so completely accepted by it. A breeze stirred the grass, making it whisper like an old friend. The lion gave a low rumble in his throat, almost a purr, and shifted slightly, but he did not leave. His eyes drifted once more to the lioness, whose breathing had begun to steady. She would live. The man exhaled slowly, quietly. Relief passed through him like warm water. His eyes, too, returned to her. She lay in the grass like a fallen queen, worn and weary, yet filled with strength. A mother, a fighter, a soul clinging to life not just for herself, but for the tiny hearts beating within her. The man whispered, though the words weren't meant for anyone in particular, "You're safe now." And in the stillness that followed, even the wind seemed to agree. He remained seated, his back against a rock, legs stretched in front of him. Sleep tugged gently at his eyes, but he did not give in. Not yet. Not while the lions watched, and the stars kept their vigil. There was a peace in this moment that words could not hold. Tonight, the wild had made space for him, not as a trespasser, not as a savior, as a witness. As the hours passed and the night deepened, 3 lives shared the quiet. The man, the lion, and the lioness. No threat, no sound, only breath and trust, and the stars watching from above. The first light of dawn slipped over the horizon, painting the sky in hues of soft pink and lavender. The world stirred to life again, as though the stars had passed their watch onto the sun. The land was still, yet filled with the promise of the day. Every blade of grass, every leaf, and every whisper of wind seemed to be imbued with new energy, refreshed by the night's quiet pause. The man woke with the light, though he had not slept deeply. His body, stiff from the cold ground, slowly came to life as he sat up and stretched, his eyes flicking to the lioness. The soft morning glow revealed her more clearly now. Her body still and weak, but no longer trapped by the wire that had once threatened to take her life. He checked her makeshift bandages, his fingers gently brushing against her fur. The wounds were still raw, but they had stopped bleeding. There was no new sign of injury, only the remnants of her struggle, still evident in the scars the wire had left. The lioness's breathing had steadied overnight. She was still very much alive, though every breath seemed to come with effort, her swollen belly pressing against the ground as she shifted slightly. A quiet groan escaped her lips, and for a moment the man thought she might try to rise. But her legs, still too weak, gave way beneath her. The male lion stood up suddenly, his powerful muscles rippling beneath his tawny coat. His gaze flicked from the man to the lioness, his eyes sharp and watchful. There was a quiet tension in his stance, as though he were waiting for something. The man understood that tension, that silent command from the wild. He knew what it meant. The lion would protect his family, no matter the cost. The man stood, stretching his limbs one more time before slowly walking toward the Hummer. He could not help but notice the weight of the silence in the air. The vastness of the land seemed to stretch endlessly around him, and yet, in this moment, it felt as though the world had shrunk to just the man, the lioness, and the male lion. The lion watched him intently but made no move to stop him. The air felt thick with something ancient, a kind of unspoken agreement between them. No words were needed to understand the bond. The wild had spoken, and the man had listened. Inside the Hummer, the man pulled out another first aid kit. This one was more thorough, with more bandages and tools to work with. He moved carefully, quietly, so as not to disturb the fragile peace that seemed to have settled between him and the lions. When he returned to the lioness, the male lion gave him a glance, but he did not move to interfere. It was as if he knew the man's intent to help, not harm. The lioness shifted slightly as he knelt beside her, his hands moving with careful precision. The first aid kit now felt heavy in his hands, its weight a reminder of the responsibility he had taken on. He worked slowly, tending to the lioness's wounds with the utmost care, each movement a quiet offering of kindness. Her eyes fluttered open as his fingers brushed against her side, and for a brief moment she looked up at him, her gaze heavy with exhaustion, but also with a quiet trust. In that gaze, the man saw more than just a mother struggling to survive. He saw a creature bound by the same forces as he was, caught in the threads of fate, struggling against the forces of nature, and yet still fighting to live. With each bandage, the man whispered softly, "You're not alone. We're here." And though the lioness could not understand the words, she seemed to understand the sentiment. Her breathing grew steadier, though she was still far from being fully recovered. She was a long way from being able to walk, let alone hunt, but today she was still alive. And that, in itself, was a victory. As the man worked, the lion remained where he stood, silent and unwavering. There was no growl, no snarl, only the quiet weight of his presence, like the pulse of the earth itself. The sun climbed higher in the sky, its rays piercing the early morning mist and bringing warmth to the land. But the man remained kneeling by the lioness, his focus fixed on the task at hand. The bond between them, this strange unspoken bond, had deepened in the hours of darkness. And though the day was just beginning, it felt as if they had already shared something timeless. The lioness's breathing was now slower, more even, and her eyes closed as she relaxed beneath the touch of the man's hands. The male lion watched on, his gaze never leaving the man, but the tension in his body had lessened. For the first time since this strange, silent encounter had begun, the man felt as though he had been accepted, not as a threat, not as an outsider, but as a part of this wild world, and for the first time in a long time, he felt like he belonged. The day had fully arrived, and the African sun blazed in the sky, casting its golden warmth over the vast savanna. The man stood at the edge of the Hummer, his gaze drifting over the landscape, now familiar yet still holding an air of untamed mystery. His heart, though still pounding from the events of the past few days, had slowed to a steady rhythm, as though it too had adjusted to the wilderness around him. The lioness had not moved much overnight, her swollen belly still visible. She lay in the shade of a nearby acacia tree, her breathing calm but shallow. It was clear that, while she had made progress, she was far from healed. Her injuries, though tended to, would require time. Time that, unfortunately, she did not have in abundance. The risk of losing her life or her cubs still hung in the air like a heavy mist. But the man had made his choice, and though the road ahead was uncertain, he knew that leaving her here would be a betrayal of something much deeper than his own fears. He had crossed a boundary, yes, between man and beast, between civilization and the wild. But it was more than that. He had crossed into a place where life and death were not separate entities, but two sides of the same coin, bound together by fragility and resilience. As he walked towards the lioness again, the male lion shifted, raising his head to follow the man's every step. The air between them had changed, the tension that had once filled the space slowly dissolving. The man, though he had no words to offer, felt a quiet respect from the lion, a recognition of the bond they had shared, a bond forged through trust, fear, and the unspoken understanding of survival. "It's time," the man murmured softly to the lioness, though he knew she could not understand. He kneeled beside her once more, his hands still and gentle on her fur, tracing the lines of the injuries that had brought them to this moment. The first aid kit, now emptied of all its supplies, lay at his feet, a reminder of the small but significant part he had played in her survival. The bandages, though crude, had held firm, and the lioness's wounds were beginning to heal, if only just. With great care, he lifted his hands from her side and stood up, brushing the dust from his knees. His eyes met the lion's once more, a silent understanding passing between them. The lioness might not yet be ready to walk, but she would recover. In time, she would return to the wild, to the endless stretch of land that had been her home, just as the man would eventually leave, taking with him the lessons of this sacred encounter. The wind rustled through the tall grasses, and the man closed his eyes for a moment, taking in the peace that had settled over the savanna. It was a rare stillness, a moment between moments, when time itself seemed to slow, allowing space for reflection. He had helped, yes, but he had also been changed by this experience in ways he could not yet put into words. He turned back to the Hummer, the distant hum of the engine, a signal that it was time to go. But before he climbed into the driver's seat, he paused for a long, lingering glance at the lioness and her companion. The lioness's eyes flickered open, and for the briefest of moments, she met his gaze. There was no fear in her eyes now, only a quiet recognition, a shared understanding of the fragility of life. The male lion stepped forward, his powerful frame blocking the sun for a moment, as though offering his own farewell. Then, with a final rumble from deep within his chest, the lioness and her mate turned and disappeared into the tall grasses, their silhouettes blending with the landscape, becoming one with the wild. The man stood there for a long time, watching them fade into the distance. His heart, still heavy with the weight of the encounter, finally eased as he turned and slid into the driver's seat. The Hummer roared to life once more, its tires kicking up the dust of the savanna. But this time, the man no longer felt like a stranger in this land. He had crossed the threshold, he had touched the wild, and the wild had touched him in return. As he drove away, the sun now high in the sky, he couldn't help but reflect on what he had learned. It was easy to see the world as separate from oneself, to think of humans as masters of the earth, observing nature from a distance. But in truth, the man had discovered something much deeper. He had discovered that in the wild, there were no true boundaries, only moments where life and death intertwined, where compassion and courage became the most powerful tools for survival. And in those quiet, final moments with the lioness, the man had not been a hero nor a conqueror. He had been quite simply a fellow creature on this earth, trying his best to help, to understand, and to survive. The road ahead was long, but it felt different now, more meaningful. The man drove on, his heart still full, as the wild faded into the rearview mirror, knowing that he would never forget what he had witnessed, what he had been a part of. Kindness is the language of the heart, and animals teach us that love knows no bounds. Let's continue spreading compassion to all creatures, great and small. If this story touched you, don't forget to like, share, and subscribe for more heartwarming tales from the wild.